Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about getting personal with TenMarks, how to use TenMarks for intervention, differentiation, and personalization. This is the second in a series of 3 webinars that are intended to introduce you to all the key aspects of using TenMarks with your students. What we're going to try and do today is give you enough information that you can experience the kind of benefits that we're hearing about from our teachers. A teacher just told me that after 10 years of teaching middle school math, she's convinced that using TenMarks assessments is one of the best ways to quickly get to know your whole class. Within just a few minutes, you can set up a diagnostic assessment on TenMarks that measures what students have retained from an entire grade level. And then once they take the online assessment, that allows you to immediately get to know them in just about one class period so that you can get to know where they are, especially when you have more than 150 or 200 students like this teacher that I was talking to. She's really convinced that this is one of the biggest ways that she knows of to quickly get to know your students and to be able to create opportunities for all of them to be successful, and most importantly, to be working productively on content that will challenge, engage, and support them wherever they may be. Before this capability, she said that sometimes it was a month into school before she really knew who those students were that needed extra support, and that this just changed everything for her. So what we're intending to do, I'll give you a quick introduction to some of the learning outcomes, and this will be kind of building upon what you may have learned either through using TenMarks for assignments or looking at our TenMarks 101 module. We're going to talk specifically about the purpose for assessment in TenMarks and review the step-by-step methods for using the results of an assessment to personalize the next steps for your students. And I will not only talk about it, but I'll show you the actual teacher and student sequence of keystrokes and what those screens look like in a live demonstration. And then we'll wrap up with a few key takeaways. So just to get started, this is the third in a series. The outcomes we're going to focus on today is how to use built-in assessments to drive personalized student experiences, and to be able to actually use the results of assessments to accept or make recommendations for work that students can make to match to Common Core learning progressions. So this specific module should take about 30 minutes or so. This kind of step-by-step series is a complement to our help center at TenMarks. So the resources you have available to you at help.tenmarks.com should kind of always be a first stop for you. We have quick little interactive guides, short videos, and recordings of all 3 of our webinars on the Help Center, as well as some live office hours and opportunities to connect with other members of our teams who are expert in the program. So without further ado, let's just kind of remind you of a few of the key concepts. If you've watched the TenMarks 101 webinar, one of the things that you learned about was how important the growth mindset is in working with TenMarks. We're trying to help students realize that anyone can be successful in math, and that there's not some fixed kind of intelligence that you have to be able to do math or not. Really, the idea that effort is important, and it's what you do when you make a mistake that actually can help you to grow and achieve the highest level of math. The sequence that TenMarks is intended to carry out or follow is always going to sit alongside your core instruction. So as you teach a lesson, you can use TenMarks to do online assignments where we have deep and rigorous problems that are aligned and actually designed to support the full depth and rigor of Common Core. And when the students work on these 10-question assignments, they have embedded support and they also get immediate feedback. If the students who are working on TenMarks are not initially successful in our premium program, you'll see that they get an automatic amplifier, which is a reteaching module that takes them through a 10 to 15 minute tutorial, hopefully reviewing some of those key ideas that might have kept them from being successful. This is kind of the standard day-to-day activity that we see most teachers using for each and every standard that they teach. What this does fundamentally is it helps shift you, the teacher, from doing things that take a long time and kind of take you away from your core instruction, like grading assignments. And it gives you more of that immediate feedback and the ability to look at data and insights for how your students have done. The TenMarks assessments are in addition to the assignments, and they're really designed to focus on what the students have retained from either past instruction before they got to your class or on a day-to-day kind of unit by unit basis for that new instruction that you're reviewing. And just like the assignments, the TenMarks problems are designed to be delivered on screen, and they're designed for the full depth and rigor of Common Core. And not only will you get immediate feedback from the assessments, but you'll get a set of recommendations where students' progress on the assessment is actually combined with what the sequences of learning outcomes for the Common Core, and based on how the students have done, will actually give you, right next to the immediate results, will give you a report that allows you to click and accept recommendations to have students either work at the review level if they haven't done well, or if they've done very well, you can actually move them on to more enriching or advanced topics. So this is kind of the overall vision of where TenMarks might fit in your classroom. And as you probably have experienced firsthand, again, we'd love for you to have done several assignments with your students or to have watched our learning webinar on this. But just to remind you that the TenMarks assignments are really going to challenge students to think more deeply about math problems, not just what, but potentially why the math solutions work the way they do. And then you'll also see that there's embedded support. So whenever students are working on assignments, they have 3 hints and a video that will give students support if they are stuck. We also give immediate feedback to both the student and then as soon as students submit their work to the teacher. And we'll talk a little bit more about differentiation, not only from the assessments, but also the assignments in TenMarks. So that's kind of the background of what we've already learned about how TenMarks work for assignments. Now we're going to jump into assessments. So the major thing that I would just remind you of is that one of the primary purposes of assessments are to figure out, what have students learned? So we're looking at the outcome, not just, what we're teaching them. And so as the cartoon illustrates, just because we taught something doesn't mean that students have actually retained it or learned to do that themselves. And by integrating assessments into our classroom instruction with a particular focus on assessment for learning, we think we can better help identify where our students are struggling that will allow us to target and differentiate our instruction to directly fill those gaps in student knowledge. The other thing that I would also encourage you to think about is I'd like to ground our conversation about assessments and TenMarks by using DeFore's critical questions as a framework for how TenMarks math can help you drive personalization in your classroom. And so, the fundamental questions we're always asking is, what do we want our students to know and be able to do? How will I know if they've learned? And what will I do if they are not at mastery? What will I do if they are? And TenMarks will help you in each of these key areas. So the first thing that you'll notice, this is a screenshot of what it takes in TenMarks to create a new assessment. And the key idea is that within just 3 key questions, you can set up an assessment. So you'll first choose who, and you can assign an assessment to either your whole class or to individual students. You'll also have to answer the question of when, and this will allow you to not only set a start date, but also an end date, and then kind of the what. What is it that we want students to know? And there are, in fact, 2 different types of assessments in TenMarks. One that is a grade level assessment, which will generally be about 35 to 40 questions, and it will cover the entirety of a grade. So if I choose 5th grade, it will be very much like an end-of-year Smarter Balance or PARC style assessment. But more commonly, you'll use the standard level assessment. And under standard level assessments, you choose what the standards are, and TenMarks will add 6 questions to each of those assessments as we build those for your students. Keep in mind that the students will never see assignment questions on assessments. These will be from an entirely new pool of questions that are created specifically to assess whether they've retained what they've been working on. Once you make that assessment for your students, they will see an on-screen assessment. So they'll see one question at a time. It will look very, very similar to the assignments on TenMarks, but there will be no hints or videos. The students can navigate back and forth between the questions and easily see where they are in the assessment. When they submit their work, they will get immediate feedback, but they cannot correct the answers. They'll just get the feedback and an explanation for any questions that they have not gotten correct. Then, when the students have submitted their work, that's where you get to not only see the immediate results, and in this screen, which is easily reached, and I'll show you in a moment where to find this, you'll see that we call out for each of the individual students not just their overall score, but specifically what domains they have done well or not done so well in. So, for instance, some of the teachers that told me about their experiences last year said they just didn't get to certain topics, and so it's not a big surprise that there's some consistency among some of my scores. But you'll also notice that even if somebody got a relatively high score, that the domains that they're strong or weak in vary quite a bit. So what TenMarks allows you to do is to actually look at the recommendations that we've made for each of your individual students. And you can accept those recommendations either on an individual basis, or in this case, if I wanted to accept all of the review recommendations, that would be for the students who had scored low, under 60% on their key topics, they would be receiving personalized recommendations to do work that would help fill those low scoring areas. That would be what we consider review. If students score between 60 and 80%, we consider those practice, and anything 80 to 100% would be challenge. And the challenge students, when we look at the recommendations in detail, those would be providing students with extra challenge, in many cases actually moving beyond the tested standards and giving them the next up kind of additional enrichment challenges. So if I were to accept the recommendations for my whole class, the system would automatically then create a set of personalized work for the students to do. And so this is a sample of the student screen where you're actually seeing that in addition to the work assigned by the teacher for the whole class, that the students now have a series of assignments that are called personal work. And that's where they would see the recommended work from the assessments. When you are looking at your account, you can always see, what the students are working on currently and what they have coming up. And you also can see, as they complete the work, all of the individualized assignments with the scores and the amount of hints and videos that the students have been working on. And you can see that directly in the student report card. You also will see total time under your usage reports. So I think now I'd love to just show you the actual sequence of our assessments. And so let's go here to log into my TenMarks account. You're seeing a preview of the new system that we're just releasing for fall 2015-16. And I'm going to choose to go to the Create Assignments. This is where I'll manage all of my student-oriented work. And what you'll see here is that I'm looking at my dashboard initially. And when I want to go and create and look at my student assessments and the personalization, I'm going to actually dive into the area where it says work. So that's where I would be able to find all of my assignments as well as assessments as a drop-down. So what you'll see here, if I click on assessments, is that it immediately will show me any of my assessments that I've already done. But just to take you through the sequence, I'm going to click here to create a new assessment. And as we discussed, I basically have a who. And if I can send this to my whole class, that's where it's defaulted to that. If I want to do it just to individual students, I can see a drop-down list by name. I do need to give the assessment a name, so let's just call it a pre-test. And if I don't want the assessment to appear until a certain date and time, I can choose this. Otherwise, it will just default to the next hour that we're talking about now. And so if I wanted to give my students a due date, I just choose it from the calendar. And now I have the important decision. Do I want to do an entire grade level, which would usually take a whole class period or even 90 minutes? Or do I want to do a standard level assessment? So just to kind of give you a sense of what the difference is, let's click preview under grade level. And we're looking at my grade 4 class. And if I look at this, what it's going to show me is that there are approximately 30, 35 questions. And this is going to cover all of the end of grade material for whatever grade I select. So this would be what I expect my 4th grade class to be able to do at the very end of the school year. Many teachers use these grade level assessments at the beginning or the end of the year. In this case, I'm not going to use that right now. I'm going to go back and make changes. And let's say I just wanted to click the standard level, and maybe I just want to know what my students know about my first unit, numbers and base 10. And when I choose 2 different standards, that will create an assessment with 6 questions each for those 2 standards. And so again, I'm going to look at the preview, and it's showing me the exact questions that my students will see, although each of the students with assessments will see the assessment in a different order. So it will be randomized. And if I click to create, now that assessment has been newly added to my list. So you see that this is a new assessment at the top of my list because I'm looking at this by date order. It's at the top. I also could be looking at it by all these different criteria, performance, recommendations, etc. But what I'd like to do now is actually just show you what it looks like for a moment from a student perspective. So we're just going to go through this entire process flow. So when I log in here as student Johnny Karate, I'm going to now see that there is an assessment called pretest. It's in my classwork. It's the very first thing I see. And when I click start, you'll notice that it has 12 questions on it. So as I go through and see each of these individual questions, I would answer these one at a time. I can click next. I can actually go through and skip things, but if I submit that, then it does ask me. I've only answered one question, but I just kind of wanted to show you what that's like. And what I like is that in the new version of TenMarks, while I'm doing the assessment, all it allows me to do is click the next back and forth buttons and not see any of the reports or other items on the screen. So now the test is complete from a student perspective, and let's log out and back in as a teacher and show you what you'll see next. So again, I'm going into the create assignments. That's where I create and look at my student work. And I'm going to go here to work, and I'll click on assessments. And now what you'll see is that I have 1 out of 4 completed. And if I click on view details, you'll notice that I have a new submission by my student Johnny Karate. He got 8.3%. If I click on the actual number here, the 8.3%, it will show me the exact test that he received and what his answer choices were. If he was incorrect, I can see the explanation, etc. But if I go back to the assessment details, what's really interesting, I think, is that not only are we seeing how he did on the assessment overall, and how he did on each individual domain, how much time he spent. But we now have a series of recommendations. So I see all this data for this individual student down here. I also see what are the most common mistakes that students have made. If I click here, it will show me what question the students had made. Oops, something's not working quite right. But here's where if I clicked on the question, it should show me the exact question that they got incorrect. But there's two choices that I have. I can either accept the recommendations here from within the assessment. You'll notice I just clicked on Johnny's name right there, and it shows me that based on his performance on these two standards, he's at the review level, which is the lowest level. You'll notice I skipped most of the work, so clearly he did poorly. But at this level, from grade 4 for 4 MBT 1 and 2, the recommendations are that he go back to the earlier grades. And so if I were to click yes, which it's checkboxed here automatically for me, then it would create additional personal work for him to do that would give him a personal assignment for each one of these different topics. And that's exactly what I want to do. So I'm going to accept those recommendations. And now that has been added to Johnny's individual work. And so you can see that these things are now his upcoming personal work. And so that's exactly kind of what we intended. And you can see that I can look at more detail from some of my other assessments where I have more student work complete. I can actually make some changes to the assessment. So if I wanted to give my students more time to complete this, I can change the due date. And I think it's really easy to figure out not only how to create an assessment, but how to send that out to your students and then ultimately view their results. And now that we have done the assessment, the final step would be going back and taking a look and seeing at Johnny's account that the assessments that we have created, now we're going to see some additional personal work down here. And you'll notice that these personalized assignments work very much like the assignments that I've sent to my whole class, but these are customized because they're based on Johnny's individual results of his assessment. So that's the way that TenMarks allows you to personalize the work for assessments. I'm going to show you one final thing, and just to kind of illustrate for you what we mean when we say one-click differentiation. One of the things that TenMarks does is when you actually are doing your assignments that you may have in progress, your students can be actually, like, you may have enough information just from the results of an assignment that allows you to say, hey, you know what? Johnny really did not do well when he was working on this particular assignment. In fact, he did so poorly that the system is going to give me an opportunity to use that assignment that he did not do well on and use that as an opportunity for differentiation. So just like you saw that I can accept personalized recommendations after an assessment, I also can click here to accept the recommendations for any and all of my students who have either review or challenge work if I see their assignments are not up to par, or if I already know enough from their results of their assignment that they should be challenged. So if I click on these view recommendations, what you'll notice is that it shows me exactly what would be the review work for this 4NF3B standard. And if I hover over it, it shows you, exactly what standard that was. But the 3NF1 fractions and area models and length models are the two recommended tracks for Johnny to reinforce his understanding of the prerequisite standards before I would expect him to do well on 4NF3B. So if I click to add that to his upcoming personal work, that would then add it to the list. So Johnny, who we were talking about earlier, has now got these additional standards on the fraction and area models in his upcoming personalized work. So that's one other way to differentiate based not just on the assessments themselves, but almost viewing the assignments as a micro assessment. I hope that helps clarify for you all the different ways in which you can use assessments to not only get really good data on how your students have retained what you've been teaching, but also to do personalization. The last thing I'll show you is that we have our own assessment report. So if I wanted to look at either the different grade level or standard level reports, it's showing me for my whole class, and these can be exported at any time. So it's a really great full level assessment system. Just coming back here to kind of a few key takeaways. I wanted to just remind you that there's kind of a sequence that we've just followed. First thing is to create an assessment. Usually on a unit by unit basis, you're going to be using the standard level assessment with 6 questions per standard that you click on. And then after you view the results, you'll want to look at the recommendations. And nothing happens unless you decide to accept the recommendations. But if you do accept recommendations to either give your students more challenge if they've done well, or more review work if they haven't done well, then you'll want to schedule some time to allow them to complete that extra work. Either some teachers use it for kind of extra credit, or other teachers make sure that the students have time in class to work on their personal assignments. And then when you're at the end of a unit, you can assess not only the new material that you've covered, but you can also add in those standards that if students have been doing some additional work on the weakest standards that they previously worked on, you can actually reassess them. And the good news is that TenMarks always recognizes if the students have already done an assessment on certain questions, it'll give them questions from a whole new item bank. So one of the key takeaways is also just balancing. If my students are all doing very, very well on the assigned work and their assessment results came in that they all understood what we had just covered, I might not spend as much time personalizing. But if my students have really varied results, then you may want to go ahead and really look closely at accepting those personalized recommendations and giving them additional personal work time to be working on either additional challenge or filling the gaps that their assessment results tell you they need. We've now covered the way that you can use TenMarks to get more personal by using the assessments to get real-time reporting and look at more personalized work. The next sequence or the next session, after you've done a little bit more work with assessments and personal assignments, would be to come back in a couple of weeks and look more closely at driving progress. And there we'll take a close look at TenMarks reporting and how you can really optimize the way that you're working with TenMarks for both assignments and assessments based on the data that the system is collecting for you. I hope this has been helpful. If you have additional questions, we'd love to hear from you. Just reach out to us at help.tenmarks.com and have a great day.